Good morning. My name's John Preston and I'm the chair of the LPFA. I'd like to offer a very warm welcome to our annual Fund Member Forum, both to those of you here with us in the auditorium at the South Bank Centre and to members joining us online. To start with, I just want to cover a few points of housekeeping. For those of you in the room, there are no planned fire alarms, so in the hopefully unlikely event that there's an alarm sounding, please do make your way out via the marked emergency exits. We will, of course, be having our usual Q&A session at the end of the event. Members joining us online can ask their questions at any time via the online chat function, and we'll answer a selection of those at the end. For those of you in the room, you'll be invited to ask your questions during the Q&A, and our colleagues will be available with roving microphones. We'll also be covering some of the questions that were submitted as part of the registration process. However, please do be careful not to divulge any personal information. We cannot answer any specific personal questions. But if you do have questions relating to your personal circumstances, you can visit the LPPA stand in the foyer or get in touch with LPPA online, and our moderator will put details of how to contact LPPA in the chat box. For online attendees, should you lose connection, please allow a few moments, as it will often resolve itself, but if not, you can leave and rejoin using the same link. And our team will be monitoring the live stream and will do their best to resolve any technical difficulties as soon as possible. So with all that, let me move into more substantial matters. Here's the agenda for the day. We are one of the few funds in the LGPS still running this kind of event, and it's great to see our members taking the interest in the work that we do and asking pertinent questions of our leadership. I know that our staff at the LPPA enjoy the opportunity to speak with our members face to face, and for those of you here in person, you're very welcome to ask any additional questions of any of the speakers or staff members here today during the breaks. As I mentioned, our administrators LPPA have a desk in the foyer, so if you do need any help registering for Pension Point, which is our online self-service portal, or have any questions around administrative issues such as nominating beneficiaries, please do pay them a visit. I'd strongly encourage you, by the way, to register for Pension Point, as it makes communication between us much more efficient and helps us ensure that you receive all the relevant information. As you'll have seen, there's been a change in LPFA leadership this year as we welcome Jo Donnelly as our new Chief Executive with effect from the 1st of April. Jo will be addressing you next via a pre-recorded film, as sadly she's unable to be with us in person today. And Jo will talk us through some of the significant changes that have been made to the investment pooling arrangements within the LGPS. However, whilst this will improve cost effectiveness, I'm pleased to say that this will have very limited direct impact upon you as our members. Then Richard Tomlinson, the Chief Investment Officer of our investment consultants, LPPI, will then take a deeper dive into investments and how our performance compares against the market. Then Joe Derbyshire, the Chief Executive of our administrators, LPPA, will take us through recent developments in that area, including the ongoing work to prepare for the major changes that are resulting from the introduction of the pension dashboard. Then after a tea break, Paul Hewitt will talk about what's changing in the world of responsible investment before we move into our Q&A session. But the one thing that has not changed, and the area that I know is understandably the most important thing to our members, is that your pension is safe. As every year, that is the single most important message I'd like you to take away from today, and I'll say some more about that in a moment. But earlier this year, we ran our third biannual member survey, and I do want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to respond to that. One of the themes of this year's results was that you want to better understand how your pension works and how it performs, and I want to address that with you today. Each year, we assure you of the safety of your pension. Partly that is due to the effective management of the fund's investments, but the other part of our confidence in telling you that your pension is safe is that we are operating a defined benefit pension scheme as opposed to a defined contribution one. Now, please forgive me, as I know that some of you will be very well versed in the different kind of pension schemes that are out there, but we know that not all of our members are as clear as on what I'm about to explain. In a defined contribution scheme, which you may have with other employers if you've moved around a bit in your career, you, and usually your employer, make contributions into an individual pension pot, and your pension when you retire is dependent on the total amount of money paid in and how those investments have performed to grow that pot of money. However, your LPFA pension is a defined benefit scheme. That means that your pension when you retire is a defined income for life based on a formula that is promised by law regardless of how investments perform. Now, the formula may be based on either your final salary or career average salary, depending upon the years of service in which you were contributing to the scheme. But there are two key headline benefits from a defined benefit scheme. Firstly, the risk of investment performance is borne by the LPFA, not you as the individual, as your pension is promised. And secondly, the LPFA is obliged to pay your income for as long as you live after retirement, as opposed to you being responsible for ensuring that your pension pot lasts throughout your retirement. There are other benefits too. Your pension will rise each year in line with inflation, and you can nominate a beneficiary to receive a lump sum in the event of your death, and your partner and or younger children may be eligible to receive part of your pension. Where we sometimes see confusion, and this came through in our member survey, is this idea of having a personal pot of money, so to speak. Whilst that is true in a defined contribution scheme, you have a personal pot of money and you can have a say in how that money is invested, it's not the same for your LPFA pension. The LPFA Pension Fund holds assets on behalf of all current and future pensioners, and we manage the fund as a whole, striving to ensure that we get investment growth that means we can pay the pension promises made to all of our members without seeking additional money from employers or the taxpayer. So how are we doing against that aim of ensuring we can pay pensions to all members? Well, against an economic and geopolitical backdrop that continues to be extremely challenging, from ongoing military conflicts through US political and trade policy uncertainty to high interest rates and inflation and subdued UK growth, the LPFA Pension Fund did manage to grow its total net assets from 8 billion in 2024 to 8.08 billion in 2025. We saw an investment return of 3.1% in the last financial year, and as I say, Richard Tomlinson will provide further detail on this later. We also made £19 million worth in fee savings due to our pooling arrangements, and that's a total of 121 million in savings since pooling began in about 2016. Overall, I'm pleased to say that the board is satisfied that our financial position is in line with our long-term goal of paying your pension and the level of risk we're prepared to accept as a fund. But whilst financial performance may be at the top of the list of what the board looks at in ensuring the LPFA is well governed, the performance of our administrator is also very high on our list, because we know how important that is to you. LPPA saw improved performance last year, scoring over 98% against service level agreement targets of 95%, and the average call wait time at the contact centre was well within the 4-minute target at 2 minutes and 44 seconds. Nonetheless, we know that our members don't always have a satisfactory experience with certain processes, and we continue to work together with LPPA to make improvements to the service. Complaints dropped by 1/3 in the last reporting period, and I think that is testament to the fact that things are improving. To finish, I'd just like to touch on responsible investment, although I'll try not to steal Paul's thunder. In summary, I'm delighted that we've increased the proportion of the assets in our fund that are being managed for climate change to 80%. And of course, you can find out more about our work in this area on our members' website. So, to sum up, you can be assured that our financial performance is looking good despite the economic turbulence both here in the UK and abroad. The experience you have when dealing with our administrator continues to improve year on year, and we continue to take action to ensure that we are investing responsibly. Now, before I hand over to our pre-recorded video from Joe Donnelly, I'd just like to offer sincere congratulations to Joe Derbyshire, the Chief Executive of LPPA. You may have noticed from the agenda that Jo was awarded an OBE in the King's Birthday Honours, and last month she attended Windsor Castle to receive her honour from the King himself. The honour is very well deserved for her voluntary work on driving leasehold reform in the UK. So I'd like on all our behalves to offer a sincere congratulations to Jo. Without further ado, thank you, she will appreciate that. Without further ado, I'd like now to welcome the other Jo, Jo Donnelly, our new Chief Executive.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by echoing John's words and thank you all for attending today. Thank you to those of you who have made it in person and to those of you watching online. Many of you have come from far and wide, and all of us at the LPFA appreciate the time that you've taken out of your busy schedules to attend. It's really great to know that so many of you are so interested in how we invest and how we run the fund. Of course, you will have noticed, possibly with some irony, that I'm not there with you in person. You may even be wondering if I'm currently on a tropical beach or taking in the sights of a European city break. The truth is that on the 3rd of December 2019, my partner sadly died. As you can imagine, that makes this a difficult day and a difficult time of year, and I prefer to take time away from work. Unfortunately, the forum was already scheduled when I accepted my role at the LPFA, so I hope you can forgive my absence. I do look forward, though, to meeting you in person at next year's forum. So today you'll hear from many of our colleagues on lots of aspects of our fund. We'll cover how the fund's investments are performing, how the fund is run, how we invest responsibly right the way through, to how we're managing the risks that climate change poses to your pension. I did also want to give you a little bit of background about me and my career to date. I joined the LPFA on 1st of April this year, and it's a privilege to lead this fund. I've worked within the LGPS since the beginning of 2021. Before that, I worked in central government on broader public sector pensions policy, so I was familiar with the LGPS, but not close to it. For this video, though, I wanted to summarise the findings of our member survey. I want to talk to you about the changes taking place in the LGPS and give you some insight into what lies ahead. To kick off, let's talk about the findings from our latest member survey. It's now published on our website, so please take some time to read it. The survey was sent out in April 2025 to all members for whom we have an email address. This is around 42,000 people. 3,099 people responded. That might not sound like a lot, but this is a really good response rate. You can see that most respondents were retirees or approaching retirement. We tried to increase the number of active members responding to get more representative answers, but we weren't successful this year. We'll renew our efforts for the next member survey. So what did we learn from our 2025 survey? You said that you find our communications good, but there are too many brands sending you information, and that can be confusing. Pension Point, the online portal, can be slow, but you appreciate LPPA's help desk. You want us to make sure that you can speak to people, real human beings, and still use post and paper-based communication when it suits you better. You want us to tell you about how we're tackling social issues through our investments. And you want much more information on what's happening in the LGPS. As I say, this is just a summary, and you can find detailed information in the full report on our website. I would like to thank all of you who responded. I know, like me, you probably received lots of requests for feedback and reviews and to complete surveys. So we really appreciate the time you took to do this, and we hope you will do so again in future, and encourage other members that you know to do so too. We really do listen to what you say, so let's look at the action that we are taking on the back of what you've said. Over the coming months, we'll be looking at the way that we communicate to see if we can simplify how you're getting information. That includes refreshing our website. We'll work with LPPA to improve Pension Point. I can speak from personal experience as someone who's registered and used the portal in recent months that for me it was a smooth process, so I'm hopeful that's the case for more members too. We're rolling out lunch and learn sessions with fund employers to get more of their employees, our members, engaged with their pension. We'll share more information on how we're challenging companies we're invested in on social issues. We'll look at campaigns to help members get communications suited to their needs, and I'll be coming on to changes in the LGPS in just a moment. Before I do that though, I did want to say that if you have any other suggestions, please do raise it with one of the team present at the event today or on the online chat. We'd be really glad to hear from you. So let's talk about the changes taking place in the LGPS. But first, some context. So the LGPS is one of a number of public sector pension schemes in the United Kingdom, along with schemes for teachers, civil servants, NHS workers, firefighters and police officers. The LGPS differs from those schemes though because it has investments and therefore funds. Your membership of the LGPS means you have a secure, inflation-linked pension income throughout your retirement, as well as important benefits to families should you sadly die in service. There are 6.7 million LGPS members in total across the 86 separate LGPS funds in England and Wales, with around £390 billion of investments in those funds. So it really is a big scheme that matters greatly to hard-working people delivering vital local services. At £8 billion, the LPFA Pension Fund is the largest LGPS fund in London by quite some margin. And we are one of the larger funds in the LGPS. But we're small compared to the largest fund in England and Wales, which is the Greater Manchester Pension Fund at £32 billion. By comparison, there are over 9 million members in equivalent schemes in the private sector with assets of around £1.4 trillion. Defined benefit is a type of pension scheme which is based upon your salary and how long you've worked, and it means you know what your pension will be. You may have heard of defined contribution pension schemes. These are different because you have a pension pot with investments and you can use that pot at retirement to secure a retirement income, but you have a lot less certainty than you have with a defined benefit pension scheme. The government wants to evolve how the LGPS is run and ensure we get the most benefit possible from the scale that we have in our investments. They want to achieve this by having fewer, larger and more efficient pools to manage LGPS investments and to ensure that the LGPS plays a role in stimulating economic growth in our local communities. The intention is to ultimately improve the service that you receive as an LGPS member and to ensure that investment returns are delivering what we need to ensure the fund remains in a strong position. There is consolidation taking place across the whole pension system, by the way, not just in the LGPS. You may have seen coverage in the financial press about super funds and master trusts referring to this. As part of the consolidation in the LGPS, the government has recently disbanded two of the investment pools, Access and Brunel. Some of you might be wondering what investment pools are. So for those that don't know, LGPS investment pools were set up in 2016. Pooling saw all 86 LGPS funds in England and Wales moving into 8 pools, which took responsibility in varying ways for managing the investments in those funds. The pool that we set up in 2016 was called LPPI, Local Pensions Partnership Investments. And in our pool we have 3 funds, the LPFA, Lancashire and Berkshire pension funds. Pooling was a cost-saving move aimed at reducing fragmentation. In our pool, rather than having the investments of the 3 funds managed by multiple asset managers, LPPI does that for us. This results in large savings, particularly when it comes to investment management fees. Since 2016, by using LPPI as our asset manager, the LPFA has saved over £120 million in fees. The savings for the pool as a whole is now over £200 million. Change is eternal though, and the government has now decided that in order to fully benefit from scale, 2 of the 8 investment pools must cease to operate and instead consolidate into 6 pools. All 21 funds in the 2 disbanded pools, Access and Brunel, which are highlighted here, are now in the process of joining one of those remaining 6 pools. As you can probably imagine, this isn't a quick process and it will take some time to work through all the steps. The government has set as an ambitious deadline of the 31st of March 2026, and we're all working hard to meet that. I've just mentioned that Access and Brunel have been disbanded, so the funds in those 2 pools have had to find homes in one of the 6 remaining pools. In October, Avon, Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, Somerset and the Environment Agency pension funds announced that they would also join LPPI, moving from Brunel. In many ways, all of this change won't affect you at all. Your pension will continue to be paid, and we'll all continue to try to improve the service that you get. It's possible that there will be more structural change in future, partly because government is encouraging reorganisation in local government areas, including inviting more areas to have elected mayors, and this might mean change for the LGPS landscape in the years ahead. However, I do want to reassure you that that reorganisation doesn't affect your pension, it is safe and it is secure. Now let's turn to what's ahead of us. As well as making sure that we pay your pensions correctly and on time, I have these 3 things on my radar. I've talked already about the changes taking place in the LGPS, so I won't dwell on that other than to say we're supportive of the government's plans and working closely with LPPI and the 6 funds from Donnelly who we're going to be working with in the pool going forwards. It's very important that we continue to seek ways to improve value for money and to improve professionalism. We're also supportive of government plans to shine a light on the gender pensions gap in the hope that changes can be made to help reduce it. You might have heard of the gender pay gap, but government is now also looking at the gender pensions gap, and this is something we're looking into more at our fund too. The data shows us, perhaps unsurprisingly, that many women have a more financially difficult retirement than men. This slide shows the size of the gap, not for our fund or for the LGPS, but for private sector pensions. While the gender pay gap has been reported on by companies for several years now, the gender pensions gap has not received the same attention. Many of the members of our fund and the wider LGPS are women working part-time, and many are affected by the financial impact of caring responsibilities. A woman taking time out of the workforce to look after children or elderly relatives will mostly miss out on pension contributions and savings for that period. And this lower savings rate is compounded by women generally having lower pay than men and living longer than men. This is changing, and while we can't change social norms around things like who takes on the majority of caring responsibilities, at the LPFA we will do what we can to support our members. For example, in line with forthcoming government requirements, we will be reporting on the gender pensions gap in our fund and trying to help the industry develop solutions. We will also work with our employers to ensure they have the information and tools they need to educate their employees, our members, about the impact of their career decisions on their pension. And finally, we will continue to invest in the UK. The government has clearly set out its desire for UK pension schemes, including the LGPS, to invest more in the country. Let me share some statistics with you. As you can see, we're already an active UK investor, more so than many of our LGPS peers. While our main duty is to invest to pay your pensions, we do recognise the role that the LGPS can play in regenerating our country and the communities that you and we all live in and care about. Pictured here is Edge London Bridge, being built with sustainability at the forefront. It's still under construction, but it has now reached its full height. If anyone is travelling via London Bridge Station today, you can catch a glimpse of it on the St Thomas's Street side of the station. I know that I have covered a lot today, so thank you for bearing with me. While I would have loved to be there in person to answer your questions, there is a panel session scheduled for later, which I know will be very interesting. As a team, we've looked at the questions that came in through the registration process, and I know my colleagues here in person today are well equipped to provide frank and full answers to those, as well as any that come in from the audience at the Southbank Centre or on the chat box for online attendees. Thank you again for attending. I hope that you've had a productive and useful day today, and I look forward to being there with you all next year.
Good morning, everyone. Morning. I'm Richard Tomlinson. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at LPPI. So let me get this right. Right. So LPPI, for those of you that have been to this event before, you'll probably know my face, you'll be familiar with LPPI. We are one of the LGPS pools you may be familiar with, and we manage the assets of the LPFA, and we also provide investment advice to help the LPFA board and the investment committee essentially frame the overall the implementation of the portfolio. I think as most of you are aware that, as I say, the way the relationship between LPPI and the LPFA and our other partner funds works is the partner funds retain the key big picture levers, you might say, the big strategic decisions, things like what's the asset allocation, what's the overall investment strategy, and major chunks of the responsible investment approach. And then they delegate the implementation to the LGPS pools, to us, to then implement that in line with what we've been asked to do, in line with the mandate. And we will do that, as you say, I think we've put here, diligently, cost-effectively and responsibly. And the key for us is ensuring we have alignment with our partner funds to ultimately deliver the core mission, which is, frankly, paying pensions as they fall due for the people in this room. That is obviously that's the North Star of what we're trying to achieve. And we work very closely with the LPFA staff, officers, to ensure we do that effectively to the best of our abilities. So the year in review, it's been quite an interesting year, to say the least, I think, for everyone. Lots been very busy for me professionally and personally and for various other things. But one of the things that's critical for investment markets, for us as citizens of the country, for everybody really, is inflation. Matters as someone on a fixed income, a pension. It matters for us in terms of managing the assets to ensure that our partner funds have assets in the future to pay your pensions. As I say, I'm sure you're all aware, inflation hasn't been quite as well behaved as some might have hoped. Bank of England has a target of 2%, but it has been above that for a fair while, and for a period very considerably above that. So that is providing ongoing pressure, I'm sure, for all of you, for balancing your budgets, and the same for us in terms of managing the portfolio to meet the pension liabilities in the future. And the Bank of England has responded and cut interest rates a little bit, but it's not that simple in the sense of trying to balance that, managing that tightrope between economic fragility and managing future inflation risk. As sure everyone in the room is aware, there's someone new in the White House, and they've had a few bold ideas and had quite a large impact on the world. We touched on tariff announcements. That led to quite a lot of certainly headlines and market volatility earlier in the year. And then there's a lot going on in terms of markets. You may be familiar with artificial intelligence and the impact that's having, and that's something that I think, in my personal view, I would view it as a general purpose technology, which is pervasive and is going to have a very significant change in the world, maybe like electricity did, maybe like steam power did way back when. So I think it is here to stay. I think it is very important, but understanding how that impacts an investment portfolio and the right way to invest in that isn't simple, because there's an awful lot of hyperbole around that, a lot of very you may call aggressive narratives, and I do think it's having a very significant impact on the investment outlook in terms of how we're thinking about it. In terms of looking forwards, sadly, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, next year. All I can do is work with the team and plan and try and prepare for different future outcomes. And by that, what I'm getting at is the key point really is diversification and trying to build resilient portfolios to enable the LPFA to pay your pensions as they fall due in the future. So again, for us, it's not about trying to have a big call on this is the way the world's going to be next year or next month. I think that's not necessarily the wisest approach to managing long-term capital. The key for us is preparing carefully, thinking through the different scenarios, and ensuring that the portfolio can not only survive but prosper in different future versions of the world. Finally, cost savings. One of the core tenets or drivers of LGPS pooling was cost reduction. And as we've noted there, the LPFA has saved £121 million since the creation of LPPI in 2015. I think Joe's video stole my thunder a little bit on this slide. I think she mentioned that the fund is now £8 billion. In my notes, I'd written down the fund's almost doubled if you squint a bit in the last decade. Just over 4 billion to 8. If I went into full sales mode, I'd claim that's a doubling. But it's, as you say, slightly less than doubled in the last decade, which I think is a testament to the hard work and dedication of the LPFA team. And I say a little bit of support from helpful investment markets, but it's a strong outcome, and puts, as Joe noted, puts the LPFA as one of the larger funds in the LGPS, and certainly the largest in London by a considerable margin. So on to the investment strategy. For those of you that have seen me do this presentation before, I'll probably say similar things to what I said to you last year and the year before that, but I will repeat it for those of you that are newer. So this asset allocation of the fund is a key lever or component that's managed by the LPFA, not us. So the LPFA set us an asset allocation that we then implement against. So as you can see, half of the allocation is in global equities. That is stocks and shares. Think of, I used to use BP as an example. I probably won't use that in the future because the world is changing. But think of large listed companies you're familiar with, Marks and Spencer, BP, these sorts of things, Vodafone, that you'll see listed in London. So it's about half the portfolio is in, say, listed businesses, and that's the equity of those businesses, the ownership stakes. If we come around the bottom then to private equity, so private equity is a much smaller component, it's 5%, and private equity in its simplest form is owning the equity of still corporate businesses, but in private form. And private equity can come in many shapes and forms, but that's what that is just getting at, say, it's the equity of businesses in private form, but it tends to be driving businesses through periods of change and then essentially selling them on to other owners. Real estate, as I'm sure you're familiar with, is property. The bulk of the assets in the real estate component is commercial property, but there is a degree of residential housing in there, which I think you're familiar with, you maybe touched on later. Environmental opportunities is a new component, 3% weight. This is investing in essentially things that are environmentally supportive and contribute to a better world and supporting environmental change or improvement, let's say, and climate as well. Credit is essentially lending. The bulk of that credit portfolio is either lending to corporates or what some may call asset-backed lending. So it's supporting, maybe some mortgage-backed lending through mortgages, let's say, and things of that nature. But it's essentially the lending part of the portfolio. Infrastructure at 13% is investing in road, rail, ports, that type of thing. So it's the core infrastructure that runs the country. The bulk of that is invested in the UK. And there's a number of core assets in there, which some of you, as I say, be familiar with, but it's the equity that enables us to own that. And say, for example, a flagship asset in that's within that portfolio that I like to point to, and we have a picture of it on our wall in our office, which I promised I had nothing to do with, is UCLH, the hospital in Euston. And the reason it's important to me is when my first child was born there, so I spent quite a bit of time there about 10 years ago. Cash, 1.5%. I think you're probably familiar with what cash is. And then fixed income, there's a small element of fixed income. This is bonds, government bonds and similar, and lending to corporates. Total fund returns, this is quite a busy chart. What I'd say to you, what are the key points? Overall, the fund has performed well. It's outperformed the liabilities that they're seeking to beat, and is in a healthy funding position. The longer term returns are better. The shorter term has been a little bit harder, as you can see. A lot of that is to do with, frankly, how much you have exposure to the AI theme that we talked about earlier. There's been some very significant price appreciation of some of the artificial intelligence names. But longer run, the fund has performed very well versus liabilities, and is in a very strong funding position. So in terms of outlook, there's quite a lot. Again, this is possibly the more challenging bit on the forward-looking basis. What can I tell you? I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to tell you that this is the way the world is going to go, and be able to highlight the assets that are most likely to perform well in the coming year. I think what we can say is that inflation is, my view in the medium term, inflation is probably likely going to be higher than we've experienced for a little while. I don't see us going back to inflation levels like we had in the decade of my birth, which was the 1970s. But I do think it's going to be higher than central bank rates. So I do think there's an element of thinking through what the world might look like, and how that might play out, and what sort of portfolio may make sense to protect asset values and to enable to perform in the future, to enable the fund to pay pensions as they fall due. I think there has been a change in the world. There's a very, we can have a much longer conversation about why that might be, but it's factors such as demographics, it's factors such as call it geopolitics, the way the world is changing in terms of where things are made, and you might call onshoring of the changing relationship. Certainly the UK has, the rest of the world and other countries. US trade policy remains in focus. As I noted earlier, there's the US got a new president last year. This year, I should say. He came into office, and it's a period of change. There is very significant drive from a policy point of view to influence how the world operates, and we are having to pay attention to that. What I'd say is, it's not my job to take political views. It's not my job to allow my personal political views or biases to have any impact on how I steward your capital. It's my job to understand how the politics of the world might impact the invested capital we have, and ensure it aligns with the policies of ourselves and the LPFA, and manage a portfolio to perform and survive through that. But I think it's fair to say the policy, the tariffs had a very significant impact early on, and some of the other policy action, let's say, coming from Washington is we are paying attention, because I think we are in a time where the words I like to use is the tectonic plates of the global economy and the geopolitics of the world are changing. And for those of you more familiar with how when tectonic plates move, you get earthquakes. And that is happening in markets and in the politics of this. So we've touched upon growing concerns around a possible bubble in artificial intelligence. Yeah, calling bubbles is a hard one. I wouldn't be so bold as to tell you that we're at a top, or even that there is clearly a bubble. I think there are grounds to believe that we'll see where we are in a year's time, let's say. I think there are some characteristics within that artificial intelligence piece that do look a little bit frothy, some valuations, some of the sentiment. However, there's an entirely plausible version. This could run another year or two, or it could collapse tomorrow. It's very, very, very hard to say. The thing I am a little bit more confident in is that the notion of what artificial intelligence is very significant, and it is a general purpose technology, and we are seeing how it's driving productivity in certain industries, companies, sectors. So we are thinking very carefully about how to play that and how to invest in that and ensure that we allocate assets and invest in a way that is appropriate given what those possible futures might be. Pensions bill, first fit for the future. Lots happening. This is in front and centre for myself and many others in the LGPS. From a member point of view, it's probably not so consequential, but from our point of view, we are, as Jo mentioned, actually, I think Jo touched on this in her conversation or her video. This is having an influence on us in terms of the LPPI is growing. We are taking on 6 more funds, so we're growing from 3 to 9, and that's incredibly busy, but I think very exciting and interesting, and the benefits that should flow through in time will be this: as we get larger, we will be able to hopefully be more efficient and have a larger footprint, which should lead to a more efficient implementation of your portfolio. Pension scheme, LPFA is long-term investor. That's part of the reason why I love my job. I think it's incredibly difficult to try and make calls over very short-term horizons. Yeah, trying to guess what markets might do tomorrow. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but there's a lot of voodoo involved in that kind of stuff. Very difficult. Much easier to look over the long horizon and think about how do we build a portfolio to save and to thrive and prosper, to pay pensions in the long run. So much, much more realistic, let's say, and a much more sensible way to invest. So the LPFA, whilst there are much volatility, let's say, and things that we don't know about tomorrow, over the longer horizon, the fund is well placed to navigate that volatility. And I'd say the fund's in a strong position in the sense of very good funding position, sensibly diversified portfolio. We have policies in place, robust controls, and all of the things that you're very familiar with. So my thing's gone red. It's telling me I've got 40 seconds. So what I'll leave you with, the LPFA is in a good place. We're very focused on the North Star, which is, as I say, paying pensions as they fall due, affordably and efficiently, to make sure that the fund is in a strong position to pay your pensions over the long run. It's something we focus on very intently. And the other thing that we focus on very intently, which is, again, probably priority number 1 above all of that, which is ensuring there's cash available to pay pensions today. Because ultimately the goal is you've got to have cash available to pay pensions today, so liquidity and cash available to make sure you all get paid monthly. And then secondly, build the capital to ensure there's capital available to pay the pensions of tomorrow. And I'm out of time, so thank you very much for your time. I hope that was useful.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I always stand here and think, where did a year go? And then remember that I've yet again worn the noisy shoes, and from a distance probably resemble a Christmas tree, but that's not deliberate. So today I'm going to talk to you about all things admin. So I'm going to give you an overview of the performance highlights from the previous year. I'm going to talk to you about pension increases, because I'm sure that's a topic of interest to lots of people. Always get lots of questions about pension increases. Kind of deliberate change of approach at LPPA. We'll touch on member communications, and I always stand up here and talk about pension points, so we'll do that. And there are some key projects across the industry that we'll also cover. So we'll start with the performance highlights of the year. So sometimes I stand up in here with a graph and things like that for you. I'm not going to do that this year. What I will say is that the way that this industry traditionally measures performance on casework, and when I say casework, we mean things like retirement, transfers, new joiners, and so on. Each type of work has a number of days that we need to do something in, and what that percentage tells you is how many of those things we achieve the target on. So all green, nothing to see there really, but I'm going to touch on why that's not a very good measure and what we're doing to introduce some other measures as we move forward. Contact centre, we answer the phone quickly, so consistently below our targeted 4 minutes. So you definitely get through quicker. I think what I would say from some of the feedback we get is that although we may answer the phone quickly, we don't always necessarily give you what you're looking for in terms of that resolution the first time you contact us. So slight change in tack in that it may be only a name change, but it refers to the cultural change I'm looking to drive across our organisation. So what was previously called LPP Operations, which is our casework teams, is now member services. Important that we've got members in there, important that we've got service in there so that we really drive that kind of cultural focus and attention on members to the forefront of everybody that works at LPPA. We've introduced some new technology. We've got some artificial intelligence. We've also got something called RPA, which stands for Robotic Process Automation. Some of the automations within our core system. So we've got about 5 key processes across the organisation that are now can be done end-to-end by robots. And now that's not because I'd like to lay off half the workforce, absolutely not. That's about giving our people more time to dedicate to service and members. So lots of improvement there and lots more to come. We're also award-winning, so it's nice to stand on stage having won 2 awards this year. So we won the 2025 LPF Investment Award for the Administrator of the Year, which is a nice award because that recognises the entire organisation. And at the Professional Pensions UK Awards, we won the Communications Strategy of the Year Award, and that was for work that we've done to encourage people to register with the online portal. And then we have just, as at the end of October, Hackney, the London Borough of Hackney's pension fund became our 19th administration client. So we have now 11 LGPS funds that we provide administration to, 7 fire and rescue authorities and 1 police force. Big difference for LPFA is that not only is LPFA do we provide administration to members, LPFA is one of our 2 shareholders. So there is a big distinction between funds that we just provide admin to, whereas LPFA is a shareholder and owner of the business. So I'm going to touch on pension increases. I think some of you will be aware that your LGPS pension is linked to inflation. Now, there are lots of different measures of inflation across the piece. Your LGPS pension increase is linked to CPI as at the previous September. What that means, is that last year, so April this year, inflation as at September the prior year was 1.7%. What you'll see going forward from April next year is 3.8% increase to your LGPS pension, because that's what CPI measure of inflation was at the previous September. You'll see on the left-hand side in that box, there's a small asterisk at the bottom, because sometimes we get questions from people who go, well, I've done the sums and that doesn't work. If you have a guaranteed minimum pension from opting out of what was the SERPs piece back in the day, it doesn't always quite work like that, and that sometimes explains why there can be some differences. Just as a reminder, state pension increases are linked to the triple lock, and this is a really good example of showing you how the triple lock differs from the increases to your LGPS pension. So the increase that you will get on state pension, any of you that are in receipt of it, will be 4.8% from April. And that's because the triple lock is, one of the triples is inflation, which, as you can see, was 3.8. One of them is the increase in national average earnings, which was 4.8. So that's the bit of the triple that kicks in. And the other one is, regardless of those 2 measures, there's a 2.5% increase if both of those things are lower. So that tries to explain the kind of triple lock. So any of you in receipt of a pension, you're going to see a bigger increase on your state benefits than you will to your LGPS pension come April. So I've touched on the kind of member first focus. So those traditional measures at 95%, they're typically from receipt of all information to putting a pension into payment. It might be 5 days. But if it was to take us 90 days to get all the information to put a pension into payment, we'd still pass an SLA, but it's a poor member experience. So what we're looking at all our processes kind of end to end, seeing where the employers fit in, seeing where the AVC providers, how we fit in, how we manage work, and really trying to change the way that we do things. So part of that is feedback. So feedback is a gift. You know, we do have a now large member panel, about 4,000. I hope that some of you who are here today are part of our member panel. We regularly ask for feedback because pensions is complex. So trying to communicate complex topics to people is a challenge. So we test kind of some of our communications and things like that with our member panel, and it was really good feedback about how to position things and say things differently. And we also survey across some of our key processes. So if you retire, we will, at the end of the process, we will send you a survey and ask you to fill it in. This is what it tells us, and I appreciate this is a busy slide, so I'll try to explain it in a little bit more detail. So what this slide is showing you, anybody who retired from active service, and we like a bit of jargon in pensions, don't we? So active service is someone who's in a role, in a job, they're paying their pension contributions into the LGPS, and then they retire from that job. What this is showing you is for 4 quarters, we call it a double donut. So the inside part of the donut, the blue circle in the middle, that's telling you how many people responded to the surveys that we sent out. So the key takeaway from that is most people that we survey don't respond. Then of those that do respond, which is the darker part of the circle, you can see that green, kind of white and red around the outside. That's a measure of anyone in green who responded and said they were satisfied with our service, anyone in red, the opposite, and the little white bit in the middle is kind of the neutrals. If you were to take the people who are satisfied and the non-respondents, because typically what you see in the world at large is that people are more likely to respond if they're unhappy than if they're happy. But if you were to take a leap of faith and say that the people who didn't respond are happy, the bottom percentages along there tell you how satisfied people are about an active retirement, to use my pension jargon. So, you know, it's relatively good. It will be better when we put through some of the changes that we're going to do over the next few years. We also ask about our contact centre. How happy were you when you called them? We ask how happy were you overall, and how happy were you with the person that you spoke to? We always see a difference between the two. And that's generally because people are really comfortable with the person that they spoke to and happy with, but again, they didn't always get that resolution. So that's one of those things we're looking to improve. How do we make sure that you call and you get what you need first time? We have quite a lot of member communications, so there are some things that by law we are required to send to you. So they will be things like annual benefit statements, P60s if you're in receipt of a pension. Everything that we produce goes onto those documents go into your online account. But we don't discriminate if you don't log in and look at them there. If you've opted out of electronic communications, anything that we have to send you by law, we will send to you in hard copy format in the post. There are some things like newsletters, pensioner newsletters, member newsletters, that we don't send out by post. So the only way you would receive those is if we have an active email address for you. And in terms of email address, we do have quite a lot of people still who register with their work emails and then they leave work and forget to update them. So, you know, do check that the email address that we have for you is the right one. We've got our website, LPFA Pensions. There's lots and lots of information on there, user guides, videos. You know, I would encourage you to take a look on there, particularly when you've got questions. Hopefully you'll find the answers there. And then, of course, Pension Point, I'm going to talk to a little bit more. So Pension Point, you know, do log on, make sure your details are kept up to date so that we can keep in touch with you. Really important point on point 2, you know, Jo mentioned earlier in her video about the benefits that are available should the worst happen. You know, you can make sure on Pension Point that any money that is owed to your nearest and dearest is going to the right people. You know, so keep that up to date, because that's really important and can make things run more smoothly. You can run your own pension estimates in there if you are not retired. What will I receive if I retire on X date or Y date and things like that. And obviously that is the repository for lots of important documents that I've talked about. Where are we from an LPFA point of view? Nearly half of all pensioners are registered and have a pension point account, and 39% of members overall. So we'd like to push that up for lots of good reasons. We do try to improve the portal. I think I would say at the minute, if I was to summarise, it's okay. Can be better. We have to be conscious of fraud, so we've put some new things in the background with it where it will do things like your banking app does. So it will validate essentially the details that your name matches your bank account and things like that. And at the minute, if you want to contact us electronically, there's a page on our website with some drop downs that you can use. We're also going to be giving you the ability to message us effectively or contact us real time within that pension point portal. And we do lots of stuff on engagement, supporting national campaigns like Pension Attention Week, Get Online Week, and things like that. So we actively support those things. I always take some time every year, don't I, to remind you about how important it is when you are online to be safe. There have been some very, very high-profile cyber attacks in the last year. Some of them are named up there. There was also an attack on some London councils last week. So, you know, they happen all the time. People are trying to attack all the time. And we do what we can to keep your data safe. We have a couple of accreditations, Cyber Essentials Plus and ISO 27001. We also have an ongoing training program, so we deliberately try to send what are called phishing emails to our staff to see if they bite, and if they do bite, they go back through our kind of retraining, and they're trained on an annual basis anyway. But the biggest source of problems in terms of cyber are people. You know, it's usually somebody clicks on something they shouldn't, so we have to be really vigilant and make sure that their training is up to date on that. And as I think I've said here before, all of us know that it's not an if, it's a when, you know, so we do lots of things behind the scenes around desktop exercises and real exercises, simulating attacks so that we would know what to do when the time comes. In terms of key projects, we will keep this focus on service improvement. That will involve more automation, more customer service-based training, and we are planning to replace the portal with a new portal in a couple of years, maybe quicker than that, hopefully, that will do more. Some of you here will be eligible for what is known as McLeod remedy in our industry. Essentially, 2014-15, there was a move in public sector to change the benefits that the schemes offer, and that applied across lots and lots of public sector schemes. For the LGPS scheme itself, I think I may have said this last year, but anyone here probably isn't going to get rich quick from this. About 15% of LPFA members who are eligible for McLeod remedy. That meant you were in the scheme over the right time periods, and that you satisfy all the other kind of eligibility criteria. So it's about 15% of the membership that are eligible. But of that 15%, only 5% of people will benefit from remedy. Essentially, it does the best of both. Where were you in the old scheme? Where were you in the new scheme? Which one's the best? It's low for LGPS members, and then why is it low? It's because of the way that the benefits changed from the old scheme to the new scheme. There are other public sector schemes like police and fire, where the difference between the old scheme and the new scheme is far more significant. But for LGPS members as a whole, you're looking at about, for the 5% of you that do benefit, you're probably looking at an average increase in pension of about £90 a year. So it's not material. We've started to make some remedy payments. You know, we will actively kind of reach out to those of you that are remedy eligible and have a payment and make payments in the next few months. If you know, do take a look at your annual benefit statement, your last annual benefit statement. If you've not retired, that will tell you whether or not you've got an underpin or not, and then that will kick in at the point you retire. And then last but not least, I'm just going to touch on pensions dashboard before I finish. So this is a government initiative so that you will all be able to see your pensions in one place. It will be a game changer for pensions. I've heard it being referred to as the fairy godmother to pension administration's Cinderella. I'm not sure about that one, but you will see your state benefits, you will see every pension that you have contributed to through your lifetime, regardless of whether they are defined benefit or defined contribution. There are a few very, very small exceptions at the minute, but the idea is that everything will go there. And the way it's linked in the background is organisations like ours have to provide all our information to the dashboard ecosystem, and it links based on national insurance number, date of birth, all of those things. And it pulls all information from all the pension providers and gives you a one-page summary of all the benefits you've got. And it's going to really allow people to get back in touch with those pension points that they've lost. But also, I think there is, and forgive my language, there's a view in the industry that this is going to have a bit of an oh shit moment for people, where they suddenly realise what benefits they've got in retirement versus where they'd like to be, and how much money do you need to have a comfortable retirement. But again, hopefully that will encourage people to save more if they can afford to. So where are we? The company that we're using to connect to the ecosystem, which is the same company that provides our pensions admin software, has connected. We will connect your data in the next couple of weeks. So that will go in. However, you won't be able to see anything until the first consumer available dashboard is launched. That's going to be about, we estimate, summer, maybe a bit later, 2027. That'll be the first dashboard, launched by the Money and Pensions Service, MAPS. It's anticipated that there will be potentially in the future some commercial dashboards that will also be available, but that will be your one-stop shop. You'll sign in via things like the Gov1 login that some of you may have already, and that's where you'll see all that. So it is going to be an absolute game changer, I think, in the pensions landscape. So thank you for listening. You can now go and have a coffee break. And then Paul Hewitt, who's the Responsible Investments Manager, will be talking to you. So if you could be back here promptly for us to start again at 12:20, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much, everyone.
Good afternoon. I hope you've all had a good relaxing coffee break. Some of you may well remember last year I mentioned that my daughter told me before I came onto this event, "Daddy, please don't tell any jokes." I broke that promise, and I told her that I broke that promise. And as I was telling her that, her older brother said, "Dad, you've got to be really careful embarrassing us because we choose your care home." And I thought to myself, I've done this job really well now because I've just taught my children the importance of thinking about things in the long term. And that's why we do RI. It's about investing responsibly for risk and return today and tomorrow, just as Richard was outlining earlier on. So today what I'm going to do is to take you through some of the things that we've been doing over the last year in relation to the responsible investment work that LPPI implement on our behalf. So I'll be telling you a little bit about the member survey that we've undertaken and how elements of that have been feeding into our RI work. I'll be taking you through some of the climate action progress that we've been making on our net zero investment work stream. I'll be diving into a little bit of detail about the climate solutions investing commitments that we've announced this year, and also giving you a flavour of some of the investments that we have here in the UK to bring some of this work really home to all of us. I want to flag up at the very beginning, though, that a lot of, in fact, nothing of what I'm going to tell you today is not available on our website. We have a wide range of information where you can go and find out what we do about our RI and how we do it. So we have published our member survey results. They went up just a few days ago. You can go on there and see the analysis of the member survey outcomes. You can see our responsible investment policy and our climate change policy. You can see our RI reports and also our update reports on all of our climate risk program and outcomes as well. And you can also go on the website to see a full list of all of the listed companies that we're invested in through LPPI's Global Equity Fund. And really excitingly, you can also go on and see an interactive map of all of the physical assets that we're invested in here in the UK. So, to talk about the member survey, first of all, a big thank you to all of you who responded to that survey. As Joe mentioned earlier on, it really is fantastic to get such a positive response from you, our members, because you're the people that we do this for. Just to underline, the responses that we got back were from people that we were able to communicate with through their email address. And part of the reason for that is that in analysing the information, doing so in an automated way makes it manageable for us to interpret and analyse all of the information that comes back in. So just as an extra plug here, those pension point registration pieces really come in very handy. So if you want to make sure that you do get the opportunity of responding to our next member survey on all of the questions, not just the RI pieces, then please do make sure that you're registered there. So what do we find from our member survey this year? So we understood 4 broad things. Firstly, communication matters. 64% of the respondents that came back to us confirmed for us that the communications that we put out specifically about RI help keep them happier about the fund. We also got a very clear message that it's important to you that the way that we invest avoids doing harm, at the very least, and for some of you, that actually it produces positive impact in the way that we deploy money. And there was a significantly larger number of respondents who expressed those 2 opinions than those who said, I don't care where you invest as long as you make as much money as possible. We also got a clear indication from you that social issues are important too. And in fact, when we looked at the proportion of those of you that ranked social issues alongside against environmental and governance issues, actually social issues were marginally stronger. So that's something that we're very much conscious of and taking away. And as Jo mentioned earlier on in her video, that's something that we'll be looking to make sure we report about. We also understand from you that our ability to influence the wider world is something that is of importance and relevance for you as well. And the way that we work alongside other funds like us and other investors in the investment marketplace in the context of a lot of the RI themes that are important to us is a very important way in which we work to forward our RI work. So I mentioned earlier on our climate action work. This is a long-term work stream that dates back to actually before I joined the LPFA in 2022. But I wanted to give you just a quick rundown of the range of different types of investment assets now that we have in the fund that are subject to targets in relation to managing climate risk. And as John referenced earlier on, over 80% now of our total assets are managed in some way, shape or form in accordance with targets around climate risk management. So this slide shows you the journey that we've been on and the asset classes that we have adopted targets for across the last 3 or 4 years. So in 2022, we introduced emissions reduction targets for all of those publicly listed companies that we're invested in, and also those corporates that we lend money to through publicly listed fixed income, so bonds that we're invested in. We also introduced targets for LPPI to engage with those companies who need more engagement from investors in those companies, to encourage them to do more for those companies to make their emissions reduction targets real and deliverable as well. So that's what the engagement and alignment piece is about. That's about engaging with companies to make sure that their long-term plans and emissions are in line with the International Paris Agreement on climate change. In 2023, we implemented emissions reduction targets and engagement alignment targets on our real estate assets, so those properties that were invested in. And then last year, we did the same in relation to our credit portfolio. So that's essentially lending that we do through private markets, but also to those, again, just the corporate, just the companies within that book, but also the infrastructure assets that we're invested in. We're also introducing targets in relation to engaging with them to get their long-term emissions profile in alignment with Paris. The process for all of this has been that LPPI work with us interactively. They propose targets for us to consider, and we use external advice to help us evaluate those proposals and thereby adopt them. We've been making very good progress in relation to the targets we've adopted, by and large, and where the numbers are showing that we are not yet on target, or we are behind the schedule that we had set ourselves, most of the time where that's happened, it's because over time, we have been identifying better data, because part of the challenge here is actually getting companies to report their emissions data and the commitments that they're making in relation to their own climate journey. So getting good data, even if that better data tells us that we're not quite where we thought we were before, better information is a better place to be to enable us to manage and engage with those companies in the future. We've also made a commitment to investing in climate solutions this year, which was a really big step for us, and I'll be telling you more about that on the next slide. Deploying that investment, deploying that commitment, and actually putting that investment quite literally in the ground in some cases is the next big step for that climate solutions investing commitment. Also, in terms of next steps, we're also increasingly thinking now about what is going to be the impact of the climate change we know we can expect. Science is telling us that climate change is real, and it will have an impact on the things that we're invested in. So what are the things that we're invested in doing to increase their resilience and to reduce their vulnerability to the expected changes in the climate that we see? So I said that I'd give you some more detail about climate solutions investing that we have committed to this year. So just to recap, we made a commitment to make sure that at least 5% of our fund is invested in climate solutions. That represents around about £400 million in today's terms. So we made a commitment of £250 million to a dedicated asset class that Richard spoke about earlier on, of environmental opportunities. That's added to £150 million or so of investments in climate solutions that we know about in our existing assets. And so the investments that we have made so far, we've already invested in, or LPPI I should say, have already invested in 6 funds across a range of geographies across the US, the EU, and also here in the UK, across a range of different assets in private equity and infrastructure. And the type of things that we're invested in are renewable energy and energy efficiency measures and solutions. Sustainable transport, so for obviously things like electrification of bus fleets, for example. And also reforestation and wetland restoration. And the way in which sometimes those types of assets actually deliver investment returns is by using nature to mitigate the impact of heavy rainfall, to basically allow nature to do its thing, to hold water back from in natural areas, rather than fast flowing straight through to urban areas and causing urban flooding. And the insurance benefits that that type of activity brings is where the financial returns can sometimes come from. So that's hopefully giving you a flavour of that type of investment and actually how how it works. So we're doing this because we're wanting to capture opportunities in the fast-growing green economy, and also because of the long-term consideration of environmental responsibility and its potential impact on our ability to make investment returns in the long term in the future. In the last 2.5 minutes I have left with you, I want to give you a flavour of some of the UK investing that we have in place today. So through the Infrastructure Fund, we have over £1 billion invested in 250 properties and infrastructure in communities across the UK. And we undertook a project a couple of years ago with a company called The Good Economy to help us understand what are some of the social impacts of those investments today. And we can point to 26 schools educating 141,000 children, wind farms powering 1.25 million homes, 41 healthcare facilities, 14,000 beds, ports that are supporting trade into the UK and out of the UK, and also business parks supporting local economies. So you can see here there's St Austell Business Park. One of the things that we're looking to do in the near future is to refresh the research that informed us with this information. And so that interactive map that I talked about earlier on, that will be a part of the refresh that we will be looking to do. So do look out for announcements on that. Looking closer to home, we're also investing in London's future. And so the London Fund is a fund that we helped set up with LPPI, and LPPI, along with the London CIV, which is the LPPI equivalent for the London Borough Pension Funds, marketed it also to London Borough Pension Funds, and some of those have also invested. So together, we've invested 250 million in this fund in the total, and you can see here some examples of local assets that you can go and see and make use of in time as well. So the Savile Theatre, we're helping to redevelop that and may prove to be the home for the London home for Cirque du Soleil. On the right, you have Edge, London's greenest office building, which again Jo mentioned in her video earlier on. Shepherd's Bush Market redevelopment is a really exciting local regeneration project with affordable housing as well. And again, more affordable housing in the shape of the Door project to provide 12,000 homes for Londoners in places like Stratford and East Village. So hopefully some of those things will have brought home to you some familiar places. And it's a great example of collaboration, underlines what we can do when we work together with other investors and particularly with LPPI. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that's been informative. And my colleagues are now hopefully going to return to the stage so that we can all get the question and answer session underway.
Thank you, Paul. We did tell Paul that we might actually just leave him standing there and leave him hanging, but that would have been too unkind. Welcome, everybody. I don't know if we can possibly turn the lights down, please, just a little bit, so that we can see, or turn the lights up and turn the spotlight down a little bit, so they can actually see the audience. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. We're moving into the Q&A session. We do have a roving mic in the audience. We also have some questions that have come in online, and we have 1 or 2 questions from the registration process. So I will ask for questions from the audience. Please do give us just a couple of minutes to get the microphone to you. Can I please just remind the people in the audience not to refer or give away any personal information, and to remind you once again, I'm afraid we can't answer any personal pension questions. If you do have personal pension questions, LPPA has a desk in the foyer, which I'm sure you spotted, and please do feel to ask them or to get in touch with them online. Excuse me. I thought I might start off just by asking a question which was sort of addressed to me, which is, who is the LPFA responsible to? I think that's a great question, and it's an important one. In summary, the board of the LPFA, including me as chair, are appointed by the Mayor of London. And I in particular am subject to confirmation from the Greater London Assembly. So when I was appointed, I went before the GLA committee. Anybody who really has trouble sleeping at night, if you find it online, you can actually see my interview. I wouldn't recommend it, but you're very welcome to do it. But it is important because we are an unusual organisation within the LGPS. Most administering authorities, which is what we are actually run directly by councils, by local authorities. We are not run that way. We're run by an appointed board of people who are pensions or investment specialists, but we are subject to the oversight of politicians, and in our case, the Mayor of London. So, I have other questions that I've asked, but perhaps we can start with a question from the audience, please. Gentleman there.
My name is Duncan Lindsay, and I would like to go through the fact that cyber security is a great issue at the moment, and I'd like to know how much money you put towards improving your security, and also the situation like Marks and Spencer's, who took them a month nearly to get their customer services back into shape again. I would like to ask one more financial question. How much of the pensions funds are wrapped up in bonds? I think you realise that 2 or 3 years ago we had a problem with bonds and the interest rate. I'd just like to know whether we are protected from that situation.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll take both of those. Perhaps we can start with the cyber question. Of course, there are 3 separate organisations, each of which has its own security requirements. There's LPFA itself. We are relatively light on data in the sense that we don't keep member data ourselves. That's kept on our behalf by LPPA. So perhaps, Joe, I can start with you, and then Richard, I can talk a little bit to you, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I did cover some of this in my presentation. The answer is it's quite a considerable amount of money and goes up every year because the cyber criminals just get more and more and more sophisticated. So as well as the accreditations that I referred to, like Cyber Essentials Plus and ISO 27001, Cyber Essentials Plus is the highest level of accreditation you can get. And like I say, the biggest risk is people in your organisation. That's bigger than any kind of firewalls and everything else you can put in. Criminals can get behind. So training your people to be very alert for anything that comes in is absolutely essential. And you'll probably know from your own personal perspectives that those get more and more and more sophisticated, as time goes on. So a fantastic one last week that looks like Microsoft. To all extents and purposes, it looks like Microsoft. The only difference is it's an R followed by an N, but when you look closely together, it looks like an M. And that's the kind of level of sophistication that we're seeing to try and get to people who are the weakest point in the chain in terms of human behaviour. So that's very, very hard to guard against. We can do as much as we can. And then every organisation's got to be ready for what happens when these things happen. So we do have exercises where we mimic what would happen in the event of a cyber attack, and typically you're talking about a ransom being demanded. And some of the reasons why you will see organisations take a long time to get back up to speed is because they didn't pay the ransom. Roughly, the intelligence we get from our experts say that 50% of organisations that are attacked pay the ransom. And these ransoms are pitched in a very clever way. They look at your accounts to see how much money, and they pitch the amount of the ransom at just about the right amount. That isn't going to bankrupt you, but you might be tempted to pay compared to how much it's going to cost you to try and put that right yourselves. Now, there's a moral kind of decision there as to whether you think you should be paying money to organisations that could potentially behind the scenes be, organised crime gangs, and where that money is going in terms of people smuggling and drug trafficking and so on. But you can understand why it might be tempting for organisations, particularly retail organisations, to do that. So where you see these big gaps, it's where you're having to essentially kind of rebuild systems from the ground up. And the other thing that's really hard is, you can sit there and say, well, why don't you just go revert to a backup? Because, the way that these criminals operate is they infiltrate your systems and then they sit there for weeks and weeks and weeks so that they've got the malware in your backups. So even if you go back to a backup, it's very, very hard to reinstate your system. So it's a really complex and ever-evolving, sophisticated arena, and we just have to do our best. But as I said, even the Pentagon gets hacked, right? You can have the best defences in the world. You've got to be prepared for when it happens.
And Richard, anything you'd like to add? I mean, obviously you don't have personal member data, but you do have an awful lot of sensitive data, if you see what I mean.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. Yeah, on the cyber point, certainly something we take seriously. Something we talk about at length. I'd say it's a subtly different dynamics between LPPI versus LPPA, but it's something we've invested heavily in. And on the interest rate point, what I'd say is, I think there's probably two parts to your question. One is what you may call market ructions around what took place around the sort of trust budget and for what was called LDI and that type of thing in the pensions industry. That's just not present in the fund. There isn't any LDI or anything of that nature, no leveraged bonds. So that isn't, there's nothing to think about there. Another part of that question is, though interest rates are materially higher now than they were a few years ago. Long-term interest rates have risen from maybe 1.5%, 2% to think 4-5 now. So the fund does have some exposure to long-term bonds. And what I'd say is that until quite recently, bonds were essentially uninvestable. And I'll try and, in very simple terms, the fund wants to deliver about 6 to 8% return. So if you're investing in bonds that deliver 1 or 2, that's a long way shy of what you need to deliver. So the other part of the portfolio has to work harder. If your long-term bonds are now doing 4 or 5, that's getting back to the point where it might make sense. So the fund has probably fractionally more than it had previously, but it's still a very low level compared to some of the higher returning assets, which we believe are a better place to invest, to deliver those long-term returns, to pay pensions over the long run.
Paul, one of the questions that came in before is, we talk an awful lot about environmental, social and government factors in responsible investment, but when we talk about ESG, we almost automatically start talking about climate change. Do you want to say a few words about the societal aspects from the responsible investment point of view? And then Richard, again, perhaps I'll come back to you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. And it's a really good question that came through in the member survey. I think where we look at environmental, social and governance issues, we're looking at them from the perspective of what are the things that might move the dial in terms of investment return. That it's our job to ask that question of LPPI in an informed way to make sure that we're doing our job properly. And so what we're asking about really are what are the things that, for example, the companies that we're invested in doing to make sure that they are, for example, treating their workforce well in a way that minimises the amount of recruitment that they need to do, which can be very expensive, not just in terms of paying for new people to come in, but also paying to retrain them. And there are all sorts of other issues that are social in nature that can have a bearing on the investment prospects of the things that we're invested in. And that's obviously evaluating the impact of those and the potential impact of those is a very difficult job that Richard and his colleagues are tasked with doing for us.
And Richard, perhaps I can ask you to pick up on that as well, but also to pick up on another question that came in, which is that the government's often, particularly our government, talks an awful lot about sort of local investing and investing in the UK and so forth. How does the LPFA respond to that as well?
Yeah, so on the first part, I think it's, say, the climate piece is very prevalent as part of that conversation, but it's also a little bit more difficult to get your arms around. It's a very important topic, but it is more longer dated, but it is, you are starting to see more tangible evidence in the short term, let's say, call it flooding and other things, whereas I think some of the other broader points Paul was referring to are much more tangible. You can see them now, they're here and now, and they are more, they're much more practical and tangible. In terms of investing in the UK, I think it's a really interesting point. Clearly government is pursuing a policy to ask the LGPS to invest more locally. And I think the LGPS has a very specific role to play in that, frankly. The LGPS is a very large block of capital, north of £400 billion. I think if it was one scheme, it would be the 5th or 6th largest pool of capital globally. So it's very, very significant. And I think the LGPS as well is quite an unusual place within that financial, call it the pensions ecosystem, because for the LGPS to have financial sustainability, it needs to continue to have future contributions, which means you need to have a local employment base, you need to have a local economy to drive those contributions. So I think there's a very key linkage for the LGPS into that local investment piece. And in my mind, clearly the government is saying to us, to the pools, to the funds, we want you to develop a local investment policy. And to me, I would say that breaks down into three elements. There's the hyperlocal piece, so your local patch as an LGPS fund, which to my mind really means property and housing, that type of thing, because that's hyperlocal, has very tangible impact on the local local economy and people. You can point to it, it's very tangible. At a more regional level, it then could be potentially infrastructure type things, a hospital, a road. These will serve a much broader part of the economy. And then at a more national level, I'd say it's then about corporate type investing in growth companies. That's the way I would frame it, and I see that's how it's coming together. And certainly, and I see LPFA as certainly part of that conversation, a leading voice. And as many of you are aware, essentially drove the creation of the London Fund, which invests in London. I forget to get the tagline right. For on behalf of Londoners, London investing in London. I've got that slightly wrong, but I think you get the message.
Other questions, please. Gentleman there.
Hi there. Has the fund identified any holdings linked to serious human rights or international law risk? And what due diligence processes are in place to manage these exposures?
Richard, do you want to take that one? Sure, so it's a very topical subject, and a thorny one, frankly. And every asset owner or pension scheme is engaged in this conversation and trying to find an appropriate balance and landing point. What I'd say is first of all, there's two elements, two layers, let's say, to the governance. There's the LPFA, who's the fund that you're members of, who have policies and processes, and then there's LPPI, which I'm the Chief Investment Officer of, and we have policies and processes. So as I touched on earlier, we manage the assets of the LPFAs, of the fund. The assets are pooled, so we need to ensure that whatever we do within the pooled vehicles works for all partner funds. We can't just make a single unilateral decision for one fund versus the other. So that's the context. In terms of the specifics of human rights challenges or abuses, whatever word you want to use, we have a human rights policy. I suspect part of the concern would be around, let's get the frame right, the UN, Gaza, OPT, but the list that the UN maintains, we screen against that daily. So when names are on there, we will engage with the company and check for, it'll then kick into our our human rights policy, which then leads to enhanced due diligence. We'll talk to the company about what their processes are. It's public domain information. There's one name that we have on that list, which is booking.com. It's public domain information. So that's the one name where we have had significant engagement with the management of the company on that and what they're doing in terms of their enhanced human rights processes.
Oh, gentleman at the back there.
Thank you. The question of sort of renewable energy, solar panels, and wind farms and so forth, all requires steel. And of course, the manufacture of steel does a lot of harm. I think arc furnaces and things are coming in. So how are you actually dealing with that conundrum, if you like, of trying to get the arrangement, getting steel at a cheaper cost and so forth?
I think that's one for me, isn't it? Okay, so...
I might give Paul a chance as well in the end.
Oh, yeah. Paul, you're very welcome to say that.
I was going to ask you to start, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I sort of what's the word, jumped the gun. So I think, you ask, it's a very pertinent question. The world is in transition. We are in the middle of an energy transition, and I'm sure many are aware, it's not the first time we've been through an energy transition from wood to coal to petrochemicals, whatever you want to call it. And now or to oil, I should say. They're moving into something different. And it's needing a huge amount of natural resources to build the infrastructure of tomorrow. What can I tell you? That I think there is significant investment into greening the steel sector and how to create green steels and other things. There's significant effort going into finding ways to reduce the carbon content of things that get built. Certainly within the stuff that where we are active, There is, we have a net zero commitment, and that is reflected into the activities we take place. For example, there's a very large building. I don't know if Paul mentioned it, opposite London Bridge Station. We call it Project Thomas. I forget the official name. It'll be London. It's a large tower block. Office tower. And there's been significant efforts as part of the construction of that to reduce the carbon footprint, essentially, of construction. I know, Paul, you've probably got some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, so it's EDGE is what we call it. Yeah, it's fabulous, but we've been invited to go and see that in construction. But I think to your point, I mentioned in my presentation about the climate solutions investing that we do, and I mentioned about the fact that investing in advancing technologies is a part of that work stream. And so the types of technologies that Richard was just talking about in terms of greening the steel sector, the development of those technologies is also the type of thing that the Climate Solutions Investing Fund is aiming to profit from, because it is an investment opportunity as well. You're quite right, there's demand for steel, that's not going to stop. And therefore, being able to develop green steel is something that has tremendous potential from an investment perspective as well.
Question that's come through, which I think also goes back to partly the question the gentleman at the front was asking, was how do you calculate my pension? And the short answer of that is, you may recall during my opening remarks, I was talking about the fact that one of the benefits of a defined benefit scheme is that you are guaranteed a pension determined by a formula, and that pension is guaranteed by law. But it works in exactly the same way in determining what pension you're entitled to. So the LGPS itself has a set of rules which are determined by the government, and it is the rules of the LGPS which determine pension entitlement and how your pension is calculated. So I mentioned earlier that it's based on a formula which is determined either by your final salary or by your career average salary, and which of those depends upon which years you remember the scheme, because they change the rules partway through. But it is the rules of the LGPS which determine what your pension is and how much you can be paid, which I think to some extent goes to the question, in a more generic sense, the question that was being asked earlier. Question that came in earlier is the pension, Paul, is the pension fund checking green investments to make sure they aren't greenwashing?
The short answer is yes, in combination between our interaction with LPPI and LPPI's own processes. So the climate solutions investing that goes on is done making use of something called the Net Zero Investment Framework, which sets out very clear criteria about what are viewed as climate solutions. On a quarterly basis, we have an investment committee meeting at which one of the reports that comes to us is around ESG, and that includes measures around green investments that we have across the whole fund. And that is picking up on, amongst other things in the listed equity sector, picking up on the revenues reported by companies, and those revenues related to activities which are green activities. So I mentioned earlier on about data quality. This is a really important point. One of the things that we ask about sometimes is, of the companies reporting, how many of those companies reporting of those green elements are actually overseen as a part of their audit process? How many of them have their auditors actually look at that part of their disclosures? Because that's an important guarantor for us that the information we're using is reliable. So all of those different factors and considerations feed into the decision-making process. But of course, the implementation of that is really with Richard and his colleagues, and they have an in-house process called their ESG SatNav, which I could talk about, but it would be wrong for me to do so, because Richard's here with us.
Okay, so let me just gather my thoughts. So, yeah, we have lots of internal process. Something LPPI does is good process, or we focus very heavily on that. So within terms of the underwriting and the ESG SatNav, what can I tell you about that? It essentially separates out the key elements of that, breaks down each investment grouping, let's say, into the most pertinent risks that you have, and you think about what the risks surrounding this specific investment, then maps those against the things you would look for, then creates a framing of that then we can underwrite, essentially, when we look at a new investment. So it's trying to find a way of saying, for this type of investment, what are the most important risks we need to consider, and then checking that they have been appropriately managed or discharged, let's say, and then putting a rating on that, and then we continuously review that on a quarterly basis to make sure that we're on top of the whole myriad of risks that each investment faces.
Other questions from the audience, please? I'm looking for a lady rather than a gentleman. There's a lady over there, if I may.
Yeah, hello. You mentioned about the government dashboard where all pension information will be stored on there. So I assume that pensioners and pension providers and various government bodies will then have access to that information. Is there any way that you can opt out of that scheme if you preferred not to have all your pensions on a dashboard?
No, it's a short answer. But obviously you don't have to use it, and no one else can see your data. It's held securely in one place. There were some initial challenges when dashboards were first talked about how secure they would be. You know, what if a fraudster got hold of your information and then can suddenly see your... but the login process is quite rigorous. So if you've ever used the government gateway logons and things like that, essentially the way into the dashboard will be via the government's new Gov1 login. So I don't know if any of you have tried it, it's kind of a next step up from government gateway. So you will be required to validate your identity using something like your passport or your driver's license and things like that. So there's quite a high level of security to kind of get behind, but nobody else will be able to see your data unless they're very, very sophisticated and have got your passport and other documents like that, for example.
Other questions? At the back. I'm sorry, I'm making you run around. At the back over there, forgive me. Can you just put your hand up again? There.
Hi, it's probably another question for Joe. It was just to do with the responsiveness of the members to the survey that you send out. Every quarter, it kind of just stayed the same. I was just going to ask, what kind of steps are you taking to make sure that, I guess, the members that are not responding are now responding? Because I guess the people are responding are here, but just for the people that are not here, which will, I guess, be, I'm guessing a lot here, but which would be people that have left their old employers that were contributing. But what steps are you taking to make sure that those unresponsive ones are now responding?
That is a great question, and I wish I had a really good answer in terms of how to make people respond. I think the part of the problem is just, I mean, how many emails and things do you all get asking you to participate in surveys? I mean, you can't buy something off Amazon without being asked to, rate it 5 stars or less. So I think there's a huge amount of just survey fatigue out there, generally. We've tried things like experimenting with things like put your name in a drawer for a voucher or things like that to see if that increases the uptake. It didn't. I think people are just overwhelmed with the number of emails they get asking them to respond on things. But so I guess my appeal would be to anyone here and anyone listening online is if we do send you a survey, please respond. We do take your responses seriously and read every one of them.
I must admit, it's obviously, we were talking earlier about Pension Point and people giving us, the more email communications we can get, the easier it is. So anybody who isn't already signed up to Pension Point, anybody who knows anybody who isn't, the more you can encourage people to do that, the easier it is for us to get in touch with you, and the easier it is for you to respond to us. So I would strongly encourage people to do that. Other questions, please? I'm sure there's another one at the back over there. Does anybody at the front want to ask a question so she doesn't have to run quite so far?
My name's David Ellis. I'm still working, actually. Thanks so much for the great presentations earlier with all the clarity involved in that. And I'm very chuffed as well about the commitment to ethical investment as well, and also specifically with regard to delivering resilient climate change projects, which I'm actually still involved with. So it's good to know that my pension fund's involved in what I'm actually doing as a day job. With regard to my day job, I work for a very large corporate, and it has expanded enormously over the last few years that I've worked there, with increased efficiencies, etc., etc. I do detect, though, that there is a reduction in quality in what we're actually delivering to our clients because the organisation's got so big. And with respect to that, I'm just wondering, obviously there's some great economies of scale from pooling, with funds, etc. But from your perspective, do you see that there's any upper limit in terms of where those efficiencies cease to be gained? And is there likely to be any pooling further?
Perhaps, Richard, I'll take a stab at that and then you can sort of comment. Is there an upper limit? Yes, probably. I don't think where we're going now has reached it. I mean, as a result of the pooling initiatives, LPPI's assets under management will go from roughly £26 billion to roughly £54 billion. That's well within the range of areas where you're still getting significant economies of scale. I mean, these are estimates, but I mean, we are still expecting that we will get, you know, some fairly significant reductions in our cost per member, if I can put it that way, over the course of the next few years. I don't think the government, under their current plans, are proposing to shrink the pools again, but I'm sure everybody in the audience will be aware that there is what they're calling a devolution bill in the wings. It isn't really a devolution bill, it's much more a sort of local government reorganisation bill, and it will result in a number of councils being either broken up or merged and so forth around the country. Far less so at the moment in London, because the devolution bill doesn't actually deal with London, but there is a recognition that we'll have to come back to that. So there could be further movement over the course of the next few years, but I don't see any massive proposals to change things again, and certainly nothing that's going to result in a fund which is so unwieldy that actually we can't get economies of scale out of it, no. Richard, I don't know if you want to add?
Yeah, I firstly agree with everything John just said, and the only thing I'd add is that, as you say, it's not as simple as bigger is better or smaller is better. There are some activities where scale is your friend, and there are some where scale can hurt you. But by and large, the scale is your friend is more consequential than the scale isn't your friend. And across both axes, we are still have a fair runway to go before we would hit some of the few things where scale isn't your friend becoming something we have to think about more, if that makes sense. So at the moment, increased scale is helpful.
I mean, my only final point is, you know, I think actually, and I'm speaking purely personally here, I think there could be greater savings if some of the 86 funds that in England and Wales that Joe talked about earlier were to work even more closely together. There's still an awful lot of things that's done on a single fund level, where I think we could probably save more money if actually we work more closely together. And the sort of way in which Joe and Richard works is part of that. We've got a couple of minutes left. Any further questions in the audience? Gentleman down there, sorry.
For Joe, really. Following up on the emails, I tend not to click on links in emails, preferring to go back to the actual company website. Now, how can I be fairly certain that the email I get from you inviting you to take part in the survey is from you?
That is another great question. So you'll be looking for the kinds of things that you should be looking for in any emails that you get that are asking you to click on anything. So you're looking at where the domain name that the email came from. No, you'll be looking at whether, you know, the obvious stuff around the spelling mistakes and things like that. But scammers are getting much more clever about sending emails that don't contain those kinds of things. You know, look at the bottom of the emails in terms of the footers and the things that's it got registered company address and things like that. You know, and the other thing I would say is, we're not going to ask you to click on anything that is, you know, generally there will be a link to a web page, and then you go in and via a web page or something like that. So I think, you know, I can't guarantee that no one's going to try and impersonate us to get you to click on something that's malicious. That's exactly how scammers operate. Be vigilant, I would say, and if you're in any doubt whatsoever, you know, contact us, validate that this is a genuine email from us before you click on it.
Thank you. I think we've got time for just one more question. Forgive me, I think you've spoken already. Any other questions in the room? Just there, please.
Thank you, I'm Jean. In view of the urgency of the climate crisis, do you think that 5% in climate action is adequate? And if not, what would your goal be?
Richard, do you want to take that? Yeah, I think you should take that.
That's fine. So what I'd say is it's not merely optically, it did look like 5% in terms of environmental opportunities, but there's a much bigger footprint across the portfolio. So the LPFA and LPPI have both made a net zero commitment. They're subtly different because LPFA is a pension fund, asset owner. LPPI is an asset manager. Fundamentally, they mesh. So we have a net zero commitment for 2050, which then that means there's significant activity, alignment within the portfolio, working towards the same goals, basically. Paul?
Yeah, one thing I think I'd add is that we're, as a universal owner, we have to diversify across a wide range of different things that we invest in, and but by the same token, we're just a very, very small part of the big wide world, and whatever percentage we invest in climate solutions or elsewhere is unlikely on its own to move the dial very much. What we have to do is to be vigilant about what are those long-term risks and how they're likely to play out for us as a pension fund to enable us to continue paying pensions when they fall due. So the commitment to climate solutions is as much about making investment return from the industrial transformation that the climate emergency requires us to go through. So I think that's really where we see that the climate solutions investing piece as a part of our wider investment work. And as Richard said, there are other assets across the portfolio that are working in tandem with that commitment.
I'm sorry to say that we've reached the end of our time. But can I therefore just finish by starting off thanking our speakers for all the time they've spent today, to thank the administrators who put all this together. I'm sure you appreciate just how much work goes into organising an event like this. And finally, just to thank you. We're really grateful that you take the time to come along and give us an opportunity to hear your views and to engage with you. Please do join us for some lunch outside, and we will be mingling if any of you would like to come and have a chat with us afterwards. And I hope to see you again next year.